through here, and let's get started. So good afternoon, everybody, and welcome. I'm very grateful to you all for taking part of your afternoon on a weekend to be with us. I'm also incredibly grateful to all of you who are doing the good work out there, keeping our languages alive and going during these bizarrely difficult and dangerous times that we're in now. I hope that by your joining on this afternoon, you're also all in good health and staying healthy, and that you and your family and loved ones all remain healthy in these dangerous times we're in. I'm Tom Garza. I'm the director of the Texas Language Center, and I'm also an associate professor in the Department of Slavic and Eurasian Studies. I'm very excited to be welcoming you this afternoon because this is the beginning of a series of webinars from throughout the remainder of the summer and on into the fall and spring, focused together with the Liberal Arts Instructional Technology Center, which I'll talk a little bit more about later when I introduce one of our speakers this afternoon, a series of webinars specifically geared to online instruction. So with all of that in mind, I hope that you would keep coming back to, this is the website for the Texas Language Center, very simple to get to. If you go to the UT main page and just type in the search bar TLC for Texas Language Center, we pop right up. And there you'll be able to see under events and seminars, this is today's seminar. We'll give you information about it, how to register for it, and so forth, as you already know. I'll draw your attention to the two next events. Coming up next week, a webinar from the Teresa Long Institute on racism and linguistic diversity in K through 16 education. And staying within that theme, this is our second TLC event on Saturday, August the 8th, called Count Me In, Diversity, Inclusivity, and Long Online Language Instruction. This particular webinar is devoted to the difficulties we know that are inherent out there of trying to attend to all of the language matter that we're putting out online, and not to forget that we're in a time of national discourse on race, ethnicity, diversity, and inclusivity in our society and world at large, not to let that feature drop out of our language programs as well. So please do join us ongoingly throughout the remainder of the summer. If you've got the time, we'd love to see you and hear from you and have your input to know what's going on in your institutions around the state, if not around the country. So because we are trying to get everything done in a reasonably brief time frame, I want to get right to our first presenter this afternoon. It's my pleasure to get a chance to introduce, let me stop my screen share here and allow her to bring hers in, to introduce our first speaker. This is Dr. Dale Koike from the Department of Spanish and Portuguese, where she is a professor who specializes in the areas of pragmatics, discourse analysis, and second language acquisition, particularly in the context of interaction. She's taught in Brazil and at the University of California at Santa Barbara and North Carolina State University before she came to the University of Texas at Austin. Her research centers on pragmatics as co-constructed in dialogue between native speakers of Spanish and Portuguese and between adult language learners and native speakers. She's also begun work on issues of Spanish heritage language learning, something that I know a number of you both teach as well as are interested in. Her most recent major work is a co-edited volume called Pragmatic Variation in First and Second Language Context, Methodological Issues, and she is also co-editor of a volume of the Routledge Handbook of Spanish Pragmatics. She's currently the editor of the Routledge book series on Spanish and Portuguese linguistics. Today, her talk is called SOPI, Past and Present. Dale is here to give us a nice sort of historiographic view of how the SOPI has developed over the last couple of decades and where we are with it today. Thanks, Dale.
Well, thank you for such a nice introduction. I'd like to welcome all of our viewers and thank you for being here today. It's great to see such strong interest in oral assessment for foreign language teaching and learning. What I'm going to cover today, first I'll introduce the construct of proficiency and talk a little bit about the development of the ACTFL guidelines and the OPI for a refresher. And then I'll talk about the SOPI, the Simulated Oral Proficiency Interview. its history, and how it's structured and how it functions. And I'll mention some criticisms about it. I'll talk about my own SOPI that I developed for my Spanish Oral Expression for Teachers course here at UT, and give you a little example of what a graded or what a recorded sample might sound like and how it's graded. And if I have time, I'll introduce briefly the Spanish Proficiency Training website, which is free and open to everybody, just so you can get an idea of what to expect at, at different proficiency levels. And if I have time, I'll talk a little bit about heritage language proficiencies. So proficiency, to be proficient, is to be competent or skilled at doing something or using something. And in the case of second language learning, a main goal is to be able to perform functions through the second language, such as to talk about oneself or to request something. Whoops. I don't know why that doesn't work. Okay, the focus on oral proficiency resulted from the audiolingual and communicative competence efforts in the 60s and 70s mainly, and the development of the ACTFL, or American Council on Teaching of Foreign Languages, Proficiency Guidelines. And this product took several years of work and several iterations, as you all know. The guidelines for the speaking skill, for example, describe the proficiency levels of novice, intermediate, advanced, superior, and later on distinguished learners levels, and they provide sub-levels within the novice, intermediate, and advanced levels as well. Okay. Proficiency levels, for those of you who may not know the ACTFL proficiency guidelines or have kind of forgotten, they were guidelines originally created through collaboration between ACTFL, US government testing agencies, the ETS, and several organizations to provide descriptions of linguistic and non-linguistic features of a learner's communicative ability when they're speaking, reading, writing, and listening to the second language. Other descriptions of learner proficiency levels have come about, and there are several important proficiency scales, such as the Interagency Linguistic Roundtable, ILR, proficiency scale, and of course the CEFR scale in Europe, the Common European Framework for what I forget. And then the proficiency scales in general describe theorized developmental steps and give benchmarks that learners can aim for, and have provided pretty much a basis for assessment in many contexts. Some positive aspects that have come out of these developments are that language programs and classes have become more learner-centered and communicatively centered and function-focused. So these are very positive aspects that we can thank the guidelines for. Simulated oral proficiency interviews, or SOPIs, try to emulate the OPI as much as possible, except they're in tape-recorded format and not face-to-face. The SOPI is a semi-direct test that usually asks the candidate to speak by means of an oral or written prompt, and then that is recorded in some way. And the prompts can be in form of a text, like a newspaper text, or could be in the form of a picture or just a question, after which the candidate records their response using a microphone and sometimes now a camera. Of course, the objective is still to achieve the 4 basic qualities of a good test, which are authenticity, reliability, validity, and interactiveness. And I'll talk a little bit about the interactiveness in a minute. For the format of a prototypical SOPI, it starts off usually with some brief personal questions like, what's your name? What school do you go to? how long have you studied Spanish? And then, and these are asked by a native speaker or a fluent non-native speaker. And after a brief pause, like 7 seconds, or sometimes after a tone, the candidate then records their answer within the time limit, which is usually less than a minute or a minute, which is then cut off by another tone. And the rest of the test contains performance-based tasks designed to elicit language sometimes similar to the level check or probe phases of the OPI. And these tasks assess the examinee's ability to perform the various functions that characterize the different proficiency levels. As I said, there sometimes are picture-based tasks that could require an examinee to demonstrate an ability to ask a question about pictures or give directions to somebody, let's say using a map, describe a particular place based on a drawing, or narrate a sequence of events in the present, past, or future using drawings in the test booklet or the sheet of paper, whatever they have. Other tasks on the test require examinees to speak about selected topics and perform in what we would say are real-life situations. These topic and situation-based tasks examine the ability to handle functions and content that characterize maybe the higher levels of the ACTFL guidelines, and could include speaking functions like stating advantages and disadvantages of something, or stating and supporting an opinion, apologizing, giving an informal talk, a short one. And the OPI for candidates that don't have such a high level of proficiency and would be greatly challenged by these kinds of tasks, the interview could be appropriately ended in shorter time. But in the SOPI, you don't have that luxury of checking what the level is. So the candidate, the candidate probably won't say much, or will try to give it a shot and then not say anything else. After questions of various levels are given, and in the OPI, there may be a wind down question or two. And then after the SOPI is completed, the examinee's response tape is scored by trained people, raters, who apply the criteria that are used. The scores range from novice level to superior, and now more recently the distinguished level. I should mention that the Center of Applied Linguistics also follows this format for their SOPI. They found a pretty high correlation of scores with those that resulted from an OPI face-to-face. Another advantage is that any teacher or administrator could administer the SOPI because it's a recorded test. And also the SOPI creators claim that there's a increased validity and reliability because it could be rated by the most reliable raters and could be rated in a controlled condition in the results over the OPI because of the standardized format and the fact that it's uniformly with all the interviewees. And the advantages here are saving time and costs, etc. My own SOPI at UT, which was called RACS, it's now defunct. They took it down, is because of the platform. It was modeled after the TOPT. This was for my course for future Spanish teachers to pass the Texas Oral Proficiency Test, or what was called the TOPT. Now it's called the TEKS for LOTE, requirements for certification. It was modeled after the TOPT, and the TOPT required monologic answers of approximately 60 seconds in length, and the candidate was downgraded if there are too many pauses and hesitations. In earlier versions, the students read a prompt, got 1 minute or so to get to answer or to prepare an answer, and then they taped it onto a cassette tape in the language lab. But now, if I ran this type of test in my class, I would use Canvas, which is our course management system. And the students can record on QuickTime and then load that file up into Canvas, and I could grade it right into Canvas. It's even possible for the students to record themselves at home using a camera to show that they're not reading anything. And although the test prompt in each case is something related to activities that we had done in class, they never knew the exact topic or the theme. So if we had been practicing, let's say, narrating in the past tense, they would know that that would show up as a question, but they wouldn't know the specific question beforehand. So now I'm going to show you a little sample clip from an old SOPI. And the question was, someone's proposed that the companies and schools hire more women to take administrative positions than men. Argue strongly for or against this position, supporting your opinion with reasons. And I should warn you that in this tape, this was done in the language lab, so you'll hear background noise from other people taping. Okay, so I'm not going to play the whole thing for you, but you could hear how it's very artificial. This particular person's answer was very artificial in terms of rhythm and timing and tone. And she was very careful of choosing her grammar and words to express the answer. Not all the answers that you'll hear from all the students are this carefully planned, but she did this pretty consistently, and she was her grade suffered from it, but that was just the way she did it. Okay, so I did
make a quick comment. Is a number of people are saying that they couldn't hear the audio, and I think it's because do you have on your audio setting on share computer audio?
I don't know. Oh, they didn't hear it at all? Shoot.
Yeah, we didn't hear any of the.
So how do I share that?
Hi, Dale. It's Claire Parrish. If
Hey,
you just
Claire.
click, hi, how you doing? If you just click on the little speaker icon, there's that arrow up.
Arrow up.
And it will say select a speaker.
Arrow up. Oh, there's this one?
The little arrow next to it gives you all the audio options, and you can go straight to your audio settings from there.
You know what? Let's just skip it. I'll just go on. All right. So anyways, I did a study on the SOPI results for Spanish that were compared to OPI results by the same candidates a month later, and found that the particular question had more effect than the type of test modality itself. But the test modality did influence the particular strategies that they used and the type of discourse that they used in their answers. The OPI reflected, as you can imagine, a more interactive nature of two speakers talking together, while the SOPI gave a more formal and sometimes awkward discourse. Like the SOPI had more fillers, like and etc., because there's only one person, right? And they corrected themselves much more, which is in a way good because they're self-correcting. But overall, the speakers in the SOPI context tended to stay more on task and produce more ideas with better organization than in the OPI. This could be an effect of having another person, as I said, co-constructing ideas with you in a face-to-face format. And I should say, at the end of my study, I suggested that a proficiency test probably should exclude or include the candidate's ability to be giving monologic or SOPI-like and dialogic or OPI-like context in a range of topics, if that's in the ideal world. Here's a sample rubric made by Dr. Gonzalez Pino, Barbara Gonzalez Pino, a while back. And on the horizontal bar, you can see the different levels. And on the vertical, you can see the different features that she was looking for. So you have here task and function, discourse content, vocabulary or context, and the grammar, the accuracy of the grammar, comprehensibility, sociocultural fit, that is if what they were saying was appropriate for the interaction, consistency, and fluency. So she was considering all of these in her ratings, and that's a professional rater. This is the one I used in my class, and I should say that since this was a course designed to help them with proficiency, I tested them regularly, and this rubric was used for not only proficiency tests, but also achievement tests. So they had, this was applied several times. So it actually isn't really a proficiency test as much as more an achievement test. But here you see content, which doesn't even appear in the previous rubric. And that's because these students had to do some research before on this given topic, and then come and do some answers or give a presentation. And, but I did include here structure and organization, adequate lexicon, adequate grammar, fluidity, and the final one was how the person responded to the questions by their audience when they gave presentations. So you can see here's a different take on the rubric. It all depends on what your goals are. But I do think you should have a rubric because your students need to know your expectations and you need to know yourself. Okay, whoops. So not all conversational, not all conversations, not all SOPI are like conversations. So we should not consider them conversations. There really are interviews where one person controls and the other responds. And Young and he talked about interactiveness, or the way that the test candidate draws on different types of knowledge, and that needs to be show up in some way in your grading. And that is the knowledge of the L2, how to overcome communication difficulties, because when they run into problems, how can they work out that problem, how to organize and plan a task, knowledge of the topic, and emotions towards particular tasks and topics, which would be the affective part. So the ideal would be to have all of these enter into their answers and acknowledge it in some way in the ratings. Okay, in my own conversation classes, I try to have the students put together actually a portfolio of recordings and videos of different types of talk with people of different relationships and in different contexts and with different functions. So this would give me more of an idea of their range and their breadth of proficiency in different settings. I think I have a few more minutes, yeah. The Spanish proficiency training website that's up on Coral is free, and you can use it to train yourself or your teachers or learners. Even I used it in my Spanish training, Spanish teachers training class, and it helps learners of Spanish understand these proficiency levels with practice in evaluating other people and also themselves. It's free and it provides some training. It allows them to get it in whenever they feel like it instead of having to go through a course. The web-based it's a web-based corpus. It has 327 videos, 1 to 5 minutes each. And there are 38 learners represented on it, including 16 Spanish heritage learners. And they talk about different topics, considering that high-level learners, like the superior level, should be able to communicate in the language with accuracy and fluency to participate fully and effectively on a range of topics in formal and informal settings from both concrete and abstract perspectives. Well, how many people can get to superior is hard. So anyways, here's a set of the proficiency levels. And you can see the SPT levels are not exactly the same as the ACTFL levels, but they're pretty close. This was done to simplify the scale in various ways. Just because the website is basically to introduce the idea of proficiency and not to get them ready to be a rater of ACTFL. Okay, so this is the website. And as you can see in the top tabs, you have the different proficiency levels, which I just showed you. And they go through practice of how to work with different proficiency levels and what they could gain as far as recognizing the features of those different levels. And then you have a video activity and glossary, etc. So these top tabs tell you what's available, and then you have a, let's see, where am I? Okay, so then again, here are the proficiency levels, and then there are some activities beneath it to help them get a feel for those different levels. And then this is the main part of the site. For example, Elizabeth, this woman here, is talking about her family, which of course is an easier topic. So you listen to her talk and you view, if you can't hear everything, you're able to access the transcript. And then after you, let's say, hear her again talking about the past, which is a more difficult topic, or making comparisons, or talking about politics, those are very more abstract and more difficult. So after the viewer looks at maybe 4 to 5 videos, then they are able to do the next part, which is learning about grammar accuracy. And it asks you specific questions. In what area did this learner show fairly accurate grammatical control? And that gives you, let's say you clicked on D, you would be able to get an answer immediately. And then the other levels are vocabulary, fluency, conversation management, or how well they interacted with the other person, and generalizations, etc. And after you listen to, let's say, 5 videos, and then you're asked to give an evaluation. And this is a self-grading thing. So let's say you saw Elizabeth at first was beginner intermediate, and that was said that X tells you, no, that's a wrong answer. Then you guessed advanced and it got the wrong answer. But then you said intermediate advanced, and you said, yeah, that's a good answer. Okay. So those are the features of this. It's just to give an idea of how this all works, or as far as proficiency. And then there is a user's guide to give you more training, more video activities, and samples. I should say that these these levels of evaluations on these learners were done by an ACTFL proficiency rater, a professional rater. So we have that validity, plus we have other people who also did the whole site. So with that, I thank you. Muchas gracias. And we can go to the poll if Betsy's even there. There she is. Okay. So should I stop sharing or what? So the first question is, when making your own SOPI, it's a good idea to evaluate grammar, lexicon, fluency, organization, or all of the above. And I see some questions rolling in. Wow. Maybe that was unanimous.
If anyone wants to unmute and ask Dale a question, otherwise I can go to the chat and try to grab questions that came up.
Oh, really? Oh, I didn't even see them.
Mm-hmm.
So it looks like almost, yeah, everybody has answered. No?
Betsy, do you want me to group the questions together?
Sure. Did you take a look at them?
I've got them all here. I've been
Yay.
putting them together real quick to see if I can get a few choice ones to Dale.
Yeah.
So Dale, from this is I'm putting together questions from Maria and Jeanette, who asked, this would have been at the point that you were talking about, was fairly early in your talk about the administration of the SOPI. And the questions were, how do you control for the students not reading the answers? And how do you set up the timing for each of the answers that they would give?
Okay, so the SOPI has actually gone through many iterations, and as we have become more tech savvy in teaching, I'm able to have better and better control. They used to do this in the language lab, so they were totally controlled by me. I was standing there watching them, and they couldn't cheat. In the later iterations, when I let them do it off campus, they had a strict time limit and they had to use their camera so you could see if they're reading. And also, since it would be really difficult to ask a question like, you know, talk about your most terrible experience, and then they would write it out or whatever. They can't do that while you're watching them on a camera. And also, if you only give them 40 seconds or 30 seconds, they can't write a whole lot out. If they just write down a couple words, that's okay with me. There was one person once who I could tell she was looking up words on a dictionary, online dictionary, but you know, we talked about it afterwards. She stopped. So that, I hope that. Oh, and the Canvas also gives them a specific time limit. If they don't submit their answer before that, they get an F.
And how do you set that time limit up?
It's a Canvas feature.
Through the Canvas, okay.
Yeah.
Related to software and platforms, there were several questions that asked, what software or apps do you recommend that are out there for SOPIs from Babak? And there were a couple of suggestions, including Extempore and linked.com, L-I-G-T.com. Were there any other software or apps that you would use, Dale, for SOPIs?
I just used QuickTime and then gave them that strict time limit. The rack system I mentioned was great. It was wonderful, and it had specific times, and everything was on the screen. They could immediately tape right into it. But the builder of that, which was a UT grad student, built it with Flash, and Flash, as you all know, is going away. So UT took it down, unfortunately.
So then I think this was a follow-up from Maria saying, do you give time for students to respond like in the LOT or BTLT-PT? Like, I mean, time to think and prepare, like 20 seconds, time to respond 20 seconds. Is that how the
yes.
SOPI's set up?
Yes, I give them, usually I give them like 30 to 40 seconds, depending on the complexity of the answer. And then to actually speak, actually for my class, I make them talk for 2 minutes, and which is a long time compared to the SOPI, which is only like 40 seconds or 60 seconds maybe. But I wanted them to give me more discourse and less. So they got used to doing that.
Nice. Kevin asks, how do you account for students with learning differences who just need more time to process the information? Do they get a version of the questions with different time limits?
That's a good question. You know, I've taught this course at UT maybe 20 years or something. And in the first 18 years, I never had anybody who had a learning difficulty. But then suddenly when that became an issue, then I got students saying, oh, I need more time, etc. So I did give them more time, but I told them, you know, if you take the takes for load, I can't guarantee that they'll give you extra time. So they had to realize that.
Terrific. And I think I covered the big topics. There were some other questions, but they were related to other things like development of courses at Coral and so forth, which we will talk about in the other two talks. I'm seeing if there were any other questions. We still have a couple of minutes.
Well, the answer to this first question was yes, it's all of the above. That
Yes. Okay.
those. And I guess we don't. Did they put up my question number 2? No, right?
Oh, there's time for that if you want to put up a second.
Is there time?
We still have about 3 or 4 minutes. Sure.
No, you're kidding.
Just posted it.
Perfect. Here we go.
Okay, a SOPI is measurement of overall proficiency, does not replace an achievement test that measures mastery of content, is not a face-to-face interview, must have a rubric that affects goals.
I think your group of students is kind of a ringer, Dale. I think you have extremely, very, very good students in this class.
Oh yes, I have such great students here. Thank you. That's right. So the right answer is all of the above. Well, thank you very much for listening, and surely I'm sure we'll have questions at the end as well.
Yeah. Thank you, Dale. Join me in thanking Dale, everyone. You can use your hand clap feature or just clap virtually to yourself. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
So let me move on to our second presenter, and it's really very nice the way I think you're going to find the 3 talks this afternoon really jibe one with the other, kind of follow one from one to the next. It's my pleasure to introduce my colleague, Dr. Patricia Kyle, as well. She is the coordinator of special projects for the College of Liberal Arts Instructional Technology Services. This is the group we call LATES at the University of Texas. She's also the director of online instruction in the Department of French and Italian here at UT Austin. She holds a PhD in French linguistics from Indiana University, where she specialized in applied French linguistics and second language acquisition. And she holds an MBA and MA in information and learning technologies from the University of Colorado. She's taught French language and linguistics, second language acquisition, and language teaching methodology at the graduate and undergraduate levels, and specializes in the design, implementation, management, and staffing of online language courses. And all of those really are impressive because it's quite a portfolio that she does at UT Austin. This afternoon, she's, as I said, seamlessly segueing from Dale's topic into her own formative oral assessment online, going global in the digital age. Please welcome Pat Kyle.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to our talk today. We're so excited that you're all here. And is there a way to get rid of the poll here, Betsy? Because I'm still seeing it on my screen. I think There, I did it. Never mind. Okay, I didn't know I had that kind of power. Okay, well, thank you, Tom, for that really, really nice introduction. As part of my appointment in French at the University of Texas at Austin, Tom mentioned that I supervise or I direct the online language programs in the department, but I also supervise a multi-section course that's a bridge course between lower division and upper division language study. And that course is called French 317C. And so what I'm going to be doing today is talking to you a little bit about a project that I did in that course that allowed us to stretch formative oral assessment across an entire semester by involving partners for our students here at UT Austin who are actually from the University of Grenoble in France. So with that, I'm going to share my screen. And there we are. So as we get started with this today, I want to mention again that because I'll be talking about a bridge course during this presentation, what you want to be aware of is that the bridge course is well placed in a sense for the kind of project that we are doing with respect to formative oral assessment, because it can be applied both at the basic levels and at the advanced levels so that we could really stretch it across the entire curriculum. And so I don't know about you, but for me, that's a very exciting prospect. So let's get started. So the Global Virtual Exchange Initiative at the University of Texas at Austin encourages faculty to partner, faculty here at UT, to partner with faculty at other institutions abroad. And I'm going to show you their website. Hopefully you can all see that. Isn't that beautiful? And so basically what it is they want to encourage here at UT Austin a sort of expansion of our abilities to teach our students, but also expand our ability to collaborate outside of the institution. And so they're very generously offering funding for this. They don't make you do it for free. And so it's a good thing to keep in mind for those of you who are at UT. This is a grant opportunity that's available to all faculty. And it's offered, I think, more than once during the academic year. So it'd be something that many of us will want to hear about.
Yeah, can I interrupt just for a second to say, because once you have gone off the PowerPoint, can you just exit PowerPoint so we can see the web page?
Oh, you did not see the web point?
We're not seeing the web page yet.
Oh, okay, hold on.
Or you could put the URL in the chat too.
Yes.
Oh, okay, I'll just do that. Can I do that at the end?
That's even easier, yes.
Okay, all right. So the Global Virtual Exchange Initiative, as I said, encourages international collaboration. And it's in fact, if you think about it, it's totally appropriate and consistent with the kinds of goals that we as language teachers have every day. So what we're going to talk about then is a project that was, again, set for the intermediate level and in French. We'll talk about specifics of how it was planned and implemented and what the outcomes were. But then we'll also talk about how to adapt that model so that we can extend it both across languages and across the curriculum. Mm-hmm. So before we get started, or go too far anyway, I would like to ask you a question. If you could tell us what you think, just off the surface, right? But what you know right now, what do you think about the notion of going global in the context of formative oral assessment in the online environment? There's a lot packed into that. So tell me what you think. And here's our poll. Betsy.
There it is.
Okay, and I'll read the poll to you. It says, how would you characterize the notion of going global in the context of formative oral assessment? Would you say it's very intriguing, not intriguing, but not uninteresting either, uninteresting, or very uninteresting? I can tell you, because I know you can't see the results, that so far things are looking very positive. Okay, we're about 67% have voted, 77%, y'all are fast. Okay, 88%. Okay, and well, probably everyone who's going to vote has voted. I don't know if I can end the poll. There we go. Are you, can you all see the results now? Okay, so most of you 95%, that's pretty good, said it was either intriguing or very intriguing. Okay, some people are going, not so much, okay, or really not very interesting for me. And that's okay. I mean, everybody has their interests. Maybe by the end of this presentation, you'll feel differently, but if not, well, that's okay too. All right, so I'll stop sharing that poll. I think, there we go. All right, and we'll move on. All right, so in this session, I'm going to start with a brief introduction, and then we'll talk about specifics of planning, implementation, and takeaways for the global virtual exchange project that we carried out in French. And then we'll talk about extending the project, and I'll talk to you about some of the initiatives that are already going on here at the University of Texas at Austin. They're very exciting. And then we'll end with some concluding remarks about the process as a whole and things that you yourselves might want to try out in your own classes, whether that be at the university level or the K-12 level. Now, clearly, global virtual exchange projects seek to provide real-world collaborative opportunity. So the particular project that my colleagues and I carried out in French first entailed establishing contact with partners abroad. Okay, some of you may already have that. We didn't, and we had to start from scratch. We did not know any professors of English that we could work with in the target culture, but we found them, and they turned out to be great. Okay, so we want to talk about first doing that, and then we want to talk about facilitating interpersonal communication. Now, we talked about the SOPI is not necessarily representative of interpersonal communication, right? But what we'll be talking about in this session is. We're going to be talking about interpersonal communication both among faculty partners, which had some challenges in and of itself, and also between the American and French student cohorts who took part in this project. So the communication between students of French here and the students of English in Grenoble were student driven, okay? That means they were conducted all outside of class, and they continued over the course of an entire semester. Now, you could also establish this in a secondary class and carry it out over a longer period of time if you wanted to. So for an entire academic year, if you wish. So students in our program met every 4 weeks online for an entire 16-week term. And the results actually turned out to be more positive than anticipated by any of the faculty partners. So let me start by reviewing that French Global Classrooms project, so planning, implementation, and takeaways, and then go on to discuss the options that you might want to consider yourselves for extending the project or adapting the project for your own needs up and down the curriculum and across languages. Then I'll conclude by reviewing key points that concern the formative oral evaluation online in the context of global classrooms. So let's get started by talking about how the project was planned. As you see in this very lovely photo, and notice who looks odd in this photo. That is moi. Okay, so everybody else looks beautiful. So this is my partner, Rose Potter, who's a specialist. Many of you probably know her. She works now in the Department of Spanish and Portuguese, teaching Spanish. And before that, for years, decades before that, she was a very well-known Spanish secondary teacher here in the Austin area. That's me in French. And here we have Christiane Collin and her colleague, Coralie Parefico. And these were our two colleagues who were professors of English, okay? So we started off by having a planning meeting in Lyon in the summer of 2017. That's us in Lyon having, as you can see, a delightful lunch. We then met collaboratively online throughout the academic year from 2017 to spring of 2018. And then we launched the project in 2018. So finally, we debriefed, sorry, there are 2 3s here, this should be a 4, debriefed in our meeting in Grenoble in the summer of 2018. So I just want to say before I go any farther that looking back now, I attribute a great deal of our project's success to our collective willingness and ability to share our resources and our knowledge and our practices through the use of technology. Without that, I don't know what kind of project we would have ended up with. So speaking of the project, let's talk about the objectives just a bit. This is a project objectives, not our learning objectives. We wanted to facilitate meaningful communication for everyone involved. And by meaningful, I mean, we wanted people to be talking about topics that were of interest and that they really wanted to talk about. We wanted to promote intercultural awareness for all of the students. We felt that was a very important aspect in addition to the communication aspect. We wanted to respect the academic course requirements, and this was mainly for the students here at the University of Texas at Austin. We didn't want our students to feel like they had gotten more work and more stress, if you will, as a result of happening to be in the pilot class where we carried out this project. So we wanted to make sure that we didn't demand too much of the students so that they felt like, it was a normal part of their workload. And lastly, we wanted to encourage students to take more responsibility for their own learning. And they did all of these things in the context of this particular project. So we did have some pedagogical foundations that we respected as we proceeded through the project. So first, we wanted communication to be bilingual in nature, and we wanted to make sure that we had scaffolding that supported successful communication. And again, this was more for our American students who were at the intermediate high level of language proficiency as compared to their French partners who were probably at a somewhat higher level of proficiency in English. So in pairs, our American students were matched with individual French students. That was for two reasons. One, the pairs supported each other and made it easier, less daunting to actually speak with a native speaker. And then also because we had more American students than we had French. Second, we wanted students to exchange video recordings from their own culture or about their own cultures in their native languages, which meant that the students would learn about the target cultures through the eyes and languages of their partners abroad. We thought that was a very important factor in our feature of our project. Third, students would take responsibility for their own learning because they would have to negotiate with their partners abroad to manage their online meetings, make sure everybody showed up. If they didn't show up, reschedule, that sort of thing. We also had to deal with technology and finding the best technologies to use. Fourth, our students' responsibilities needed to be consistent with those of their academic course. I think I mentioned that before. So our tasks needed to target for our students intermediate proficiency in listening and speaking. And we wanted our course topics, our contexts, to be consistent with our academic course. So each in the course, there were 4 cultural themes, and those cultural themes were repeated as the topics for the students' conversations. So for example, one was holidays and celebrations, another was vacation and leisure activities, another was student life, and the last one was everyone's favorite, food and cuisine. So each topic represented a theme of 1 conversational exchange for a total of 4 conversations over 16 weeks. And then we also wanted to be sure that students earned appropriate credit for their work. So they were assessed and they were given grades both for their participation and for their performance in this project. And I'll talk more about that in just a minute. Okay, so oral proficiency guidelines. We wanted to be sure that we were targeting the appropriate proficiency levels for our intermediate students. Now, hopefully, I'm going to show you this proficiency criteria. You tell me, Tom, if you can see it or not, okay? Can you see it? You can see it. Can you hear me?
Hang on. We can hear you, but we're only seeing your slides. So you need to just hit exit, escape, I should say, to get out of the slides and then pull the.
Okay. Hold on. All right, let me do this and then.
Just briefly exit your presentation.
It's not working. Let me put my magic keyboard over here. That's still not working.
Click stop sharing.
There you go. And now let's see if you can pull up your.
I need to go back and screen share again, right?
Right.
And I believe that's where I need to be. Okay. So,
there it is. Yay.
Yay. So just to remind everyone, I know Dale just showed us this, but we didn't focus on specific criteria for each level of proficiency. So just to kind of focus you here, intermediate high speakers converse with ease and confidence when dealing with routine tasks and social situations at the intermediate level. They're able to handle successfully uncomplicated tasks and social situations requiring an exchange of basic information that relates to their work, school, recreation, particular interests, and areas of competence. Okay, so you see, you kind of get an idea of what the students can handle. Sharing has stopped, windows closed. Okay, we'll get there, don't worry. We're back, share, and let's go to, I feel like I've done this so many times. Play from current slide, there we are. All right, so now that we've seen the criteria, you see how task or function is part of how the students are assessed and their ability to carry out the task. The context, the content, and the accuracy that all are part of the criterion referenced ACTFL, OPI, and of course the SOPI as well. So we created our assessment rubrics to reflect those proficiency criteria. In addition though, we added some things that we thought were important for our students to include some credit for having performed and also some credit for having prepared to do what they needed to do, because there was a good deal of preparation involved. So our criteria for the rubric included preparation, comprehension success, communicative success, how well did they get their message across to the native speakers, and if they didn't get it across well, how did they reform, recast what they were trying to express, content, and accuracy. And with respect to accuracy, we were looking at grammar and pronunciation in the context of, again, successful communication of their messages. So now we've talked about planning, and we're going to move on to talk about implementation. And I'll just give a shout out to my graduate student assistant, well, he's not a grad student anymore. Ha! Tom, it's Maxence Lecomte is now Dr. Maxence Lecomte, excuse me. He created these beautiful visuals that you're about to see. So basically, the project took place in 4 stages. And you'll see here 1, 2, 3, and 4. Okay, and then it's like rinse and repeat. So over here, the first thing they did was we established the topic that the students would tackle by asking an open-ended question about the cultural theme at hand. So students answered the same question, French and American, in a video recording. Okay, and they answered it in a way that pertained to their own culture. So for example, the first question, quelle est ta fête favorite? What's your favorite holiday? Americans most often talked about American holidays, and they did that in English, okay? On the French side, they talked about the French holidays or celebrations in French, and they each made their own videos. And I can tell you, these were very interesting videos. After that, the students exchanged their video recordings. So the French partners got the American video, and the Americans got the French video, okay? And then they had to go about the task of understanding and interpreting what had been said, keeping in mind that these were native speakers in each situation, and they weren't necessarily altering their speech in a way that would make it easier for non-natives to understand. Although they started thinking about that as they went along, I have to say. So students would reflect on the content of the video, and then they were tasked with coming up with questions that weren't answered in the video or that arose to them as they went about the task of interpreting what their partners had said. And then those questions became the foundation for the online conversation. So the students, when they met, they had something to talk about, and it was already very structured, and they were ready, well, usually ready to go, okay? Lastly, so almost lastly, third, students organized their online meetings. And this is in and of itself a communicative situation, right? Because the students had to negotiate meaning with their partners abroad, and then they had to agree on a day and a time to meet and what technology to use and other details. And then lastly, they met online for 30 minutes and offered their questions to their partners, and the partners attempted to respond. It was a 2-step process, so half of the time was supposed to be spent in French and half of the time spent in English. And then we repeat. And we ended up repeating this 3 times. Again, I told you before, that meant 4 times over the course of the semester. Okay, so stage 1, the question. Okay, just to clarify, Before each conversation, students made original video recordings in their native languages, focusing on some aspect of the cultural topic that we were treating. So for example, as I mentioned, one of the topics was holidays and celebrations. And American students talked about 4th of July celebrations, Halloween, and Thanksgiving. On their end, French students did the same. They made their videos about traditional French celebrations in French. And I remember one in particular that was extremely amusing and creative. It had to do with French wedding traditions, and it included both images and stories about particular cultural practices surrounding marriage that were totally new to our students, and I have to admit, new to me as well. So I learned from it, as did Rose, our other faculty advisor. So other French students chose to focus on specific holidays, such as La Toussaint, which is All Saints' Day, celebrated differently and celebrated in France, and La Chandeleur, also known as Candlemas. I don't know if I'm saying that right, but it's basically a holiday in France where people make and eat crêpes as part of their celebration. So of course we had a video in which the students abroad not only showed how to make the crêpe, they also showed how they enjoyed eating those crêpes. After watching their partner's video recording, students identified aspects that were curious, interesting, surprising, or shocking, and then they created their questions for their partners based on that. So clearly the students were challenged to understand their counterparts' videos because those were presented in the target languages. So on our end, the students had to work with their course instructor, and again, this was our graduate instructor extraordinaire, Maxence Lecomte, to interpret the video content and to formulate the questions to ask so that they would be comprehensible, obviously, to their native French partners. So for example, on the topic of holidays and celebrations, the French students followed the same procedure as the Americans. Then again, with the help of their instructor on our end, the students communicated with their partners abroad to set a day and a time to meet. So there are a lot of little details that they had to work out, mostly through negotiating basically between English and French and across time zones and cultures. Very challenging in many ways. But they did it, and they did a good job of it. Let's see. So once the French students and the American students got together, they had their conversation and they asked their questions. And then finally, they recorded those conversations using Skype or Zoom or some other video conferencing tool. We tried out a bunch of different ones over the course of the semester. And of course, you know, the one we used most was, wait for it, Zoom. Yes, it became the one that we recommended, as a matter of fact, at the end of this process. So repetition is key. We repeated this process 3 more times in one term, but if you were to do it for your own classes, there's no set limit on how many times you could do this. You could do it only 2 times, or you could do it 3, or you could do it 6 or 7, depending on the length of your academic term and how you set up the process. You just want to be sure that the students have enough time between virtual encounters to be able to prepare, and also give them some time to progress linguistically, because proficiency doesn't progress as quickly as sometimes we might like to think. So I was just to add that one conversation, each conversation was supposed to last a total of 30 minutes, with 15 minutes in each language, but in reality, our students spent more than 30 minutes conversing. And while English was dominant at the beginning of the project, because our American students were somewhat shy, even very shy, about speaking French with native speakers, by the end, they had gained a lot of confidence, and they were spending much more time in French than before, and in some cases, even more time in French than in English. So we've just talked about implementation and planning, so let's move on to talking about takeaways. What are the takeaways for this project? There are quite a few, actually. Students progress very quickly, so you could consider that 30 minutes of face-to-face conversation could be equal to a normal week's worth of class time. We're thinking here about face-to-face class time because when we did this project, we were using face-to-face, but even online, this would be true. we all learned to use new technologies, and we became less, perhaps, technophobic, if you will, about trying out new things. And we didn't mind. It's just like language learning. Once you know that errors are a part of the process, it's a little bit easier to make them and not feel bad. So we made plenty of errors. So clearly the project offers a significant bilingual and bicultural learning opportunity for students. Faculty partners benefited by getting original cultural videos on course-related topics. Okay, we had a lot of those now. And also 4 sets of video recorded bilingual conversations, as well as text documents that they need to facilitate the project next time we do it. So those included handouts and protocols and even instructions for using technology, to include Zoom, as a matter of fact. Students benefited by creating their own original video recordings and thinking about the fact that these video recordings were for other people who were not native speakers of English. Watching and interpreting their partners' video recordings, very challenging. Communicating with their partners to negotiate online meetings. And finally, participating in 4 virtual conversations online. It's interesting that I say finally, because that was the main focus of this project. But in the end, it was only one of many things that we felt the students gained by participating in it. So I'll add that we solicited student input from the beginning of the project. Consequently, not only were our this is for you, Sarah, if you're out there, not only were our pedagogical practices open with respect to our French faculty and our French partners, but also with respect to our own students, because we involved the students in decision-making as the project progressed. I think they appreciated that as well, knowing that they were included and their voices were being heard, and that if something was not working, we would try to fix it for them. So talking more about takeaways and outcomes, let's look at the results of the survey that we gave at the end of the semester. So as you can see, I just picked a few questions. There were more than this, probably twice as many, but I picked the ones that I thought would be most interesting to all of you. We asked the students about learning. I learned a lot, and also I learned about French culture. And notice here, I learned a lot. We got a 66% agreement, which is pretty high. Was at 2/3. And then I learned a lot about French culture, we got almost 3/4, 72%. That's pretty good. And then talking about enthusiasm, 94% said they were enthusiastic about it. 5.5% were neither enthusiastic nor non-enthusiastic. And then talking about enjoyment, enjoyed meeting my French partners, talking with my French partners, making the videos, and then watching my partners' videos. Most of those were very, very high, 94% here and here. Making the videos a little bit lower at 77. Now, just so you know, we didn't take those responses for the end of the project. We actually gave the survey again 4 months later. It says September 2017, but that's my typo. It should be 2018. We asked them the same questions again, and here's what we got. Agree, 100% for I learned a lot, and I learned about French culture, and 100% for the questions having to do with enjoyment, with the exception of making the videos, and the enthusiasm question. Okay, why is this important? Because 4 months later, the students were no longer in the stressful situation at the end of the semester, having to take finals, finish this course, and get on to other things. They'd had some time to not only relax and get away from the academic setting, but also to absorb a little bit more and give a little perspective to what they had accomplished in this project. So what lessons did we learn from this? There are quite a few, actually. One advantage of creating global virtual exchange projects is, at the intermediate level, is that there is potential to extend the model up and down the curriculum. So in this case, what it means is, as we're talking about formative oral assessment, it means that we could consider extending formative oral assessment from the beginning levels all the way through the advanced levels, whether that be K-12 or whether it be university and college settings. We learned that to create a successful project, you have to make connections to the target culture if you don't already have them. Ours were totally, happenstance. Rose knew someone who knew someone who knew someone, and we ended up with 2 partners. We have learned that also Collaboration is key, since there are many decisions that you have to make, small and large, and many issues that you have to work out, including such things as logistics and time differences and cultural views of such things as punctuality and communication and project management. So there are a lot of differences. If you think about your own target cultures, you'll realize that probably those would be issues you would have to work out as well. So as the project unfolds, it's important to work closely with students and also be sure that they don't feel overwhelmed or uncertain about what they need to do or what they need to say. They need to feel like someone's in charge. And lastly, it's crucial to elicit student feedback to find out what their perceptions are of the project, so that you're not just basing it on impressions, but on their actual data. So with that, So here's the last part. Survey students to find out what they perceive to be the affordances of the activity, and they will be honest with you, I guarantee. All right, so we're going to do another poll now that we've discussed the takeaways. I would like to find out your impressions of the value of this kind of formative oral assessment in the context of a global virtual exchange. So if we could put the next poll up. So this poll says, how beneficial could virtual global exchange be for your students? Extremely beneficial, beneficial, neither beneficial nor detrimental, detrimental or extremely detrimental. I feel like we need poll music. Play some music while the polls are being completed. We're at 80%. That might be all. Okay, I think we'll go ahead and end the poll and show the results. And there you have, almost everybody seems to think, no, not almost, everyone who responded thinks, and how much is that, 9? Oh, it's like, well, yeah, 100%. Thank you very much. I did take math in school. Extremely beneficial or beneficial, okay? And I agree totally with you. And I'm gonna tell you that if you ever do decide to do a project like this, you will have a lot of people interested in knowing about it and in talking to you about it and helping you with it. So we've talked now about planning, implementation, and takeaways. Let's talk a little bit about adaptations. How can we adapt this model for novice level oral proficiency? How can we adapt it for advanced level? So how, with respect to the intermediate level tasks that we already saw for the French Global Classrooms model, and in keeping with the ACTFL guidelines, we would create interpersonal tasks that reflect more familiar contexts for students at the basic level. And we would build these around concrete topics that target word level or memorize linguistic routines typical of novice speakers. At the elementary level, we might start with a synchronous pair or small group interaction in class and build out from there. So for example, in week 4, we might do a pair or small group activity in the target language, following up on that for 4 or so weeks later with a cross classroom, perhaps student interaction. This is especially possible if you have multiple sections, as we do at the universities. But if you're in a secondary setting, you might work with a teacher in a different school who's teaching the same level as you. Maybe after that, you might have students work with or talk to a more advanced student, maybe a student at the intermediate or advanced level who's also a learner of French. And finally, you might culminate with an interaction between students and a native speaker peer, if that's possible, or a coach in the last week. And I'll talk to you a little bit more about native speaker coaches in just a moment. Now, one last thing I want to mention is this word diagnostics. There may be an opportunity for you to create a diagnostic, especially at the higher levels, the more advanced levels, to administer to the students at the beginning of the term. And then that gives you a point of comparison that you can look at the end of the semester when they've completed their communications online. Okay, let's talk about advanced level. So at the advanced levels, we want to encourage students to be more independent and to take risks in conversations. And that may be with multiple native speaker partners individually or in groups. So a lot of different options. Some options include inviting native speaker peers or experts to communicate more about some of the abstract topics, especially in courses that are cross-disciplinary in nature, so culture, literature, politics, but also art, architecture, economics, business, history, what have you. Those interactions can be conducted in Zoom meetings in which students interact with members of the target culture abroad, or with entire classes of students abroad, or they can be done group to group in the context of, say, project-based learning or research projects. So what's innovative and inspiring about this is that the final oral assessment comes to represent a real world communication task, and students build up to that task as the term or school year progresses. And if formative oral assessment is implemented starting at the beginning levels, then students may be aware of their progress from the start of their language study and all the way to the end. And who knows, they might be even inspired to keep going. You know, what do they call that? Cradle to grave, language learning. I'm for it. Okay, let's talk about what's happening. Well, we're going to try to talk. There we go. What's happening at UT Austin? So there are a number of global virtual exchange projects and also telecollaboration projects ongoing here at UT Austin. In both Spanish and Italian lower division programs, the coordinators, Melissa Murphy in Spanish and Amanda Bushnell in Italian, are using Talk Abroad, a service that pairs students with native speaker coaches for synchronous conversation that take place multiple times over the course of a semester. And my word from both Melissa and Amanda is they are having great success with these programs. In Germanic studies, Barbara Lobenthal and Orlando Kelman Portuguese have both conducted global virtual exchange and teleconferencing projects with students in Germany for Barbara and in Brazil for Orlando. And both of those projects have been extremely successful and very different. And those are both conducted at the advanced level. Now, Professor Lobenthal is even preparing to launch a new initiative that's inspired by the French Global Classroom Project, which she wants to extend in her own fashion to the advanced level of German study. So her students will be discussing topics related to her course on German history, which may include complex things like reunification and immigration. And they'll be discussing these topics with peers in a German university. Smythe Johansson, also in Germanic studies, is preparing a global classrooms project, perhaps for lower division Swedish. There aren't very many online coaches for Swedish. So Smythe is in a position where she may have to create something new and innovative instead of using a coaching service. So just to show you that French is not slacking off, and we are adapting our GVE project to fit a new revised French 317C that is going online in the spring, well, actually in the fall. And we're also considering including a Talk Abroad or some other coaching type of online meetings for use in our online French program, where it's an asynchronous program where the students don't get very much opportunity to speak in the target language. This would solve that problem. Okay, so now we've talked about extension. Let's go on to concluding remarks. It is true that designing GVE, Global Virtual Exchange projects for language students requires a high degree of organization and planning. But collaboration eases the workload for us all. So if you do undertake something like this, I encourage you to reach out and collaborate and share not only what you're doing, but share what other people have been doing as well. It can only help. Clearly, there are significant advantages for language students. Real-world communication opportunities may begin early in the curriculum and extend well beyond the intermediate level if we take good advantage of teleconferencing and other technologies. Now, while global classroom projects may be helpful for preparing students for study abroad, they may be essential for students who cannot study abroad. So it's important to note that the ACTFL Proficiency Guidelines and SOPI both offer means of providing crucial formative oral assessment at any learning level. And use of these formative assessments in global classroom contexts shows the students that they're learning a new language to be able to talk to members of the target communities and to understand a new culture, which is what they want if you ask them, or at least in my experience. So these skills, once attained in our language classes, are ones that our students can use throughout their lifetimes. I don't mean to be grandiose, but it is, I do believe that to be true. Whoops, sorry, I have to go back. All right, so yet another poll. I would like you to tell us a little bit about the level of your interest in creating a global virtual exchange project that could facilitate cultural enrichment in the context of formal oral assessments for your learners. So how interested are you in creating such a project to facilitate formal oral assessment for your classes? And the votes are in. No, 53%, 54%. I love watching the little ticker go by. Okay, we're getting there. Y'all are getting faster every time, I have to say. Okay, 77. 77. Do I hear 78? Don't hear 78. Okay, I'm going to launch the poll. There we go. Share the results. And there, how interested are you? So most of you said interested or very interested. That's 95%. And some of you are still not very interested in doing this kind of project. It is quite demanding, but I believe, I think the students and the others, the faculty who've been involved would agree that it is worth the trouble, or at least in our experience. Okay, so as you can see from our graphic organizer, we've reached the end of the presentation. Thank you so very much for your attention. And now I believe, what's this? Go away. Okay, now I believe that we have a few minutes for questions. If you have any that you would like to ask.
So Pat, actually we're right over the time a bit, so I'm going to see if we can, I'm going to ask Betsy to roll the questions from your session on, and we'll just at the end, so that we'll make sure people who only have this period of time to be online, I'll do my presentation and we'll do questions for both yours and mine together.
Perfect.
That's okay, yeah, terrific, thank you. So let me do the same here. I'll share my screen and drop this in. Pull that down. There we go. So let me hopefully try to bring a few things together that we've talked about from the previous two. Dale gave us that wonderful history and updating, if you will, kind of reimagining of SOPIs and from the 1990s to the 21st century, indeed into the 2020s, to our new Gen Z population. Pat gave us this wonderful model example of how global interaction between a US entity from K through 16 with a similar entity abroad can really pull together the kind of assessment materials that can, in a sense, create a simulated OPI. And I want to now talk specifically about using the Zoom interface in classroom preparation to apply to, and again, K through 16, anything from secondary to post-secondary school is my interest. So very quickly today, I want to go through knowing what all you do online in your regular classes that you're dealing with. Some of you are working from electronic versions of textbooks. Some of you have had to create your own materials. Some of you are having to do old school style drill and kill online, just because the move from last spring to the end of the term this past year was so jolting with COVID-19 of having to make these changes. I want to focus specifically on the types of interaction in 3 domains online that I think most represent the kind of interaction that SOPIs were really designed for, and that's the simulated face-to-face interaction that we have online. I'm going to be focusing a bit, I'll talk more about which modality, but focusing really on that simulated classroom experience of instructor to student, student to student within the larger group, keeping in mind that I know some of you here at UT, our groups may be on the small side around 15, but more normally 25 to even as high as 27, 28 in some of our language classes. So I know we're dealing with really large groups. Keeping interaction going is already challenging. Then breakout rooms, where we get to do the simulated small group work that we're used to doing in our classrooms, how they function as creating material for SOPI assessment. And then finally, the all-important asynchronous tasks, the so-called homework. And it's kind of no longer really homework because our students are already at home. It's just work not done in a synchronous classroom situation. I'm going to look at the types of interaction in all three of these environments, the mode of communication that goes on in the three of them, and then the assessment of the samples. I'm putting samples in quotes only because they're not always rateable samples, but it's what we can get from each of our classrooms. So first, the face-to-face interaction that we do, getting SOPI-like events in our classrooms. And for this, we know that you're probably now working in one of these four modalities. There may be other Google Hangouts, Teams, Microsoft Teams. Some of you are using Skype to have these interactions. I believe the majority of you are using Zoom from just polling around the Texas school system and university system. It tends to be Zoom. Some of you may be using your language management systems. For the purposes of this presentation, I want to focus on Zoom. But that I assure you that the comments that I'm making really will work on any of the, certainly the four platforms that I just showed, and probably any others that you're talking about, because I'm looking more at the holistic interaction that goes on in these three settings online. So first of all, well, the overarching commentary is I'm looking at how do we facilitate, by the use of prompts, the kind of autonomous interaction and autonomous production that you need to be able to do either an OPI or a simulated OPI in our classrooms. So how now with the environment, this is a lot of like funneling down of situation and situational environments. How do we, now that we're online, being able really to have a much smaller window, a kind of more worm's eye view of our students, speaking in a simulated classroom, how do we prompt and then get those samples that we need from our students to be able to do the kind of work we're used to? Well, I'm going to focus specifically not on textbook, not on the materials that you're using for primary instruction, but really on the kind of online interaction that can get us those models. So how do we provide prompts for engagement? Well, we must give some kind of a stimulus to get students to talk back to us, to be able to interact and respond to us. If you've come to any talks that I've done, or in fact, most of my colleagues have done around UT, we have yelled from the highest tower on UT campus for the last probably 30 years now, the benefits of using authentic materials. More and more we have seen now with a lot of empirical data, how much impact using authentic materials actually does have, not just on comprehension of material, but on production as well, both in written and especially oral form. So then how, using authentic materials, how do we encourage the broader learner-centered participation? And I apologize, I see a typo there on my own slide. It should be learner-centered participation that we're looking for. And so what you've got is just a dabbling of things like in the center of the screen, using print media, newspapers, flyers, things that are handed out, playbills, things like that. Bits of ephemeral realia, things that are reflective of the immediate time period, like in this case, a Tokyo Metro ticket that you can see down in the lower left-hand corner. Moving up to the upper right-hand, a Saudi Arabia Coke can, a Coca-Cola can with the characters in script for Arabic that also allows us to ask kind of cross-cultural questions of what is a Coca-Cola can doing in a country that is socially considerably more conservative, although I'm getting more and more nervous about what the US is. But anyway, more and more conservative than a lot of other cultures. What kind of questions could we ask cross-culturally? A menu from a Mexican restaurant over here, a Moscow metro map, and a Nigerian talk show format. So whatever the languages you're doing, pulling in bits of video, bits of print, bits of audio, all of which we can now use even more efficiently in a way online by taking them directly from their online sources to our classroom and bringing them into our face-to-face interaction. So for an example, I'm going to pop up, this is from my Russian classroom, I choose a bit of realia that I want to present to my class. It's going to be the prompt. So you give a textual that text-based or an audio-based or a visually based prompt of some kind. I've chosen for my class, well, actually it's for you all, mostly more than for my class, something that's immediately recognizable. For those of you who don't do Russians, you probably guessed this from just this lower, that golden arch, internationally recognized symbol of globalization, McDonald's. This is a McDonald's placemat that also has a short version of their menu right on it that says, bon appetit, приятного аппетита, this kind of have a good meal, have a nice meal, and then a lot of different products that they show. So what we do, I've chosen my bit of prompt. I now will need to set a level appropriate task or tasks to do with this menu. And something that we forget to do, I find, at least I forget to do a lot online, is because you don't have so much the immediate prompt of seeing your students' eyes, of being able to kind of get a feel of the vibe of the classroom, we often don't leave enough time to let students think, interact, maybe even sending messages to each other, to themselves, whatever with the material before we require them to give a prompt. So be sure to allow ample opportunity for learner-centered responses. So in this type of interaction, what you need to do, what I think one of the ways of looking at how SOPI oriented or OPI oriented interaction goes is to think of the interactions that you're doing with that prompt, in this case, a McDonald's menu in Russian, as a mini OPI prompt, as though I were sitting across from the student and said, here, look at this menu, and now I'm going to give you a reason to say something about it. So use these speech samples that you get during your interaction with students. This may be students who do the raise hand online if you're active in Zoom, or with you calling on students by using the grid of all the students present in your class. Use the speech samples to start getting an idea of kind of the floor, the base, the lowest level that you're getting of interaction, and the ceiling, the best interaction that you're getting. This is how an OPI would go as well, is I would keep asking questions, a low ball question, very simple, to make sure, yeah, the student is definitely above a novice mid, and then maybe a high question at the threshold intermediate level to see how far can I push the students before they start to fall apart. And from those responses that I'm getting based on the prompt, I start to assemble, in my mind, I may be taking notes to myself. I do tend to have a separate laptop off to the side of the one I'm projecting Zoom on, where I'm just quickly typing out notes, including student names with very specific feedback and more holistic general commentary to the entire class that I will use then to those bits of feedback to get back to the students after class is over. And then I'm going to use the overall feel of how each of those prompted assignments went in my class, these interactions went, and I use those responses and interactions to then inform what I'm going to do in my breakout room sections and what I assign for homework. So let me go first then to these breakout rooms. And in the breakout rooms, we give a chance for students in small groups, maybe 2 to 4 students, even up to 5 students in a breakout room, to try to start using the language autonomously. Now, before I go any further, let me put my singular poll up very quickly. How many of you now are using breakout rooms or use breakout rooms in your classes as we had courses end in our last semester? So Betsy, if you can put my one poll up, this is just to ask yes or no. Have you used Zoom breakout rooms or a similar like Google chat rooms in your language teaching? I'm just getting a sense of where you all are with this. So yeah, this is a simple one. So we're already at 84%. Let's give it 2 more seconds, 86%. Terrific. And so the majority of you, I'm going to share that real quick for you to see, the majority of you, about 70%, have used breakout rooms. Some of you have not, and that's a significant enough number of you, 30% of you in this group have not. And so I would strongly suggest that for those who've never used them before, there are both online tutorials as well now, thanks to groups like Coral and the TLC and other university language programs, you can probably get webinars that are much more on the mechanics of how to do it. Basically, if you look at the bottom screen of your own Zoom settings, there is a setting for creating breakout rooms that can be either assigned by you or just simply randomly assigned. I often do the random assignment one, both for expedience, but also to give students a chance to meet each other in class. Especially, I'm going to be doing that this fall when we're starting from zero and the students truly don't know one another. It was a lot easier in the spring because the students already had half of the semester in face-to-face contact, so they knew who each other was. But there are ways then that you set up the breakout rooms, allow the students, having given them a prompt, to interact with each other, and then you as the instructor can go and drop in on these breakout rooms. So you have a chance to both observe the interaction that the students will have in the class, as well as then mediate their performance. You can talk with the students that are sitting in the breakout room and say, so what would happen if you did this instead of what Brenda has just suggested? What if we did this instead? Or Sam, what do you think about what Brenda has just suggested? These, you can actually mediate and play around for the few, the minute that you might be within the breakout rooms. And then of course, from that, you can draw SOPI like a bit of a quick down and dirty assessment of where production is at that particular moment. So to create the meaningful breakout session, what needs to go on? First, you do need to provide an intriguing, if not provocative, activity or prompt for them to do. Please, please don't simply say, okay, we've covered verbs of motion, now go into a breakout room and use verbs of motion. Or we've covered food items, now go into a breakout room and talk about food, right? Give them a prompt that's going to prompt them, in a sense, incentivize them, give them a reason to talk about food or modes of transportation if it's verbs of motion. Set very clear parameters for production. What's the goal? What do I want you to come out with after your 5 minutes in the breakout room, or 6 minutes, whatever time limit you set. And by the way, you can set that time of how many minutes they have in the breakout room when you put the students into them. So what do you need to have at the end of that period of time? What is the product of the breakout itself? What do I want to see from you? And as I said, set that time limit, and it'll, if you set it yourself, it'll automatically end the breakout room at the assigned prescribed time and put everyone back in the main classroom. During your visit to the breakout rooms, listen and watch first before you say anything. Go enter the breakout room. The students will be aware that you're there. They will see your visual icon appear on their screens, but just let them keep it going for a minute, for a few seconds, and then provide some kind of mediation, some kind of interaction. Become a part of the group relatively soon into it, and of course take a few notes for feedback later, and then provide that feedback immediately after the class is over. It could be in the form of simply a chat email back to them, or an email back to them. Get some way of just giving 1 or 2 bits of thumbs up. That was terrific. Here are a couple of things to work on. But some way to feel that each one of these sessions is actually providing them with meaningful input. Now, from our perspective on the SOPIs, what's really crucial and important about all that's going on here? Continuity and expansion of the material that we presented in class. So if I started class off with that little McDonald's menu that I gave as a prompt, and we chatted about it, talked about the food items and so forth, I then give them this little 28-second video. It has a bit of, there's not much language in it, it's just a bit of a song, but I assure you, being part of the global McDonald's culture, you're all going to understand all of it. So let me just play this real quick video for you. Oh, sorry about that, hit the wrong button. Take that back. Oh, sorry about that, let me exit and pull back to that. There we go. So one more time. There we are.
Весна уже в Макдоналдс. Вкус сезона фреш. Свежие овощи в сандвичах Макфреш. И биф ролл фреш для тех, кто любит гулять.
So I love this particular piece because a number of my Latinx students will hear this and say, I swear if you didn't tell me that was in Russian, I would swear that that was just conjunto music that's being sung in a different language. So there was wonderful, sorry about that. There we go. So this will go back to a bit of what both Dale and Pat were saying earlier. Now, how do we put the SOPI frame around these little tasks? Adjust the task, not the text. So adjust what you want your students to do with that little video clip according to proficiency level. So if you're working at, say, the novice mid-level, simple task. Make a list of what and who you see in the video. Novice can only really work in memorized material, so very simple. They're just going to name off, I saw a cat, right? Just simply put the word cat, bicycle, hamburger, or food, something, whatever vocabulary they have at their disposal. The task is representative of what they can do with it. If you're working at the intermediate level, use the same video, but now who's doing what in this video, and describe the activities you see. That's an appropriate task for someone who's trying now to push maybe from intermediate low to intermediate mid. If they're already at, say, pushing intermediate mid to getting over that very difficult threshold to get to advanced, intermediate high, I might ask my Russian students, do you think that the song in the video is appropriate for the commercial? Why or why not? Which requires them not only to understand the words of the song itself being sung, which is already a fairly intermediate high task, but then to think and articulate why would what the lyrics say about a McDonald's visit is important or not. It's a song is actually all about how great spring is and what spring does, about getting out, walking around, seeing people, going on dates again, having been, this is a very Russian idea, right? So being locked up in your, and a COVID idea, being locked up in your house for so long, and now suddenly it's spring and it's warm enough to walk around again. Or even up the very higher level, the advanced level. Is globalization having a positive or negative impact on world cultures? Use examples from the video to support your position. What does it mean to have McDonald's being advertised in a very, scare quotes, Western way in a formerly communist country, a former Soviet Union of Russia? So that's how the breakout rooms can produce that kind of information. The last little bit I want to take us very briefly into the asynchronous world of what we do with our out of class experience with students. Homework in scare quotes, because as I said, they're always at home, but work when we're not actually meeting face-to-face synchronously in class. I'm sticking with this McDonald's themes just for kind of continuity in this presentation. So I set up before class ends, I say, okay, go back now, we've been playing, let's say the class was obviously say second semester, first year, we're dealing with the topic of food, and I bring this McDonald's stuff into them. I present them with the McDonald's menu. We watch that little video, and I give them the intermediate low, or maybe the novice high task to do with it. Now for homework, I say, and I give them this task: you're taking a Russian friend out to lunch at Mickey D's. You haven't received, since you're a student, you haven't received your stipend yet, so you only have 850 rubles in your pocket or your purse, whatever you're carrying with you on your body, on your person. So go to this website, and it's McDonald's RU Russian website that will have the entire menu, all of it, the entire site in Russian, including prices of all the dishes, I shouldn't, never know if I think of calling what they serve at McDonald's a dish. All of the food items, there we go, that you can buy and how much they cost. So they have to now plan, as it says, here's your task. Plan what you might order to treat your friend, but to stay within your budget. So you've offered to take someone out, but now you don't want to be in that awkward position where you go up to order and suddenly your friend starts to pick things off the menu and you realize, I'm not going to be able to pay for this. So they plan ahead and check on the menu to see what can I order from that menu and is it within my budget. So let me go back to this. There we go. So what are we looking for then? I encourage all of my instructors that I work with that usually can be a fairly global rubric that needs to be set up. And it needs to be one that students have access to it well. They need to be aware of what it is you're going to be, in a sense, assessing their language on. Now, in the OPI examples, both Dale and Pat have showed you the, which you're probably already familiar with, the criteria that ACTFL has set up for us, very detailed ACTFL, both the through their descriptors for oral proficiency and that now famous cone of proficiency that also gives descriptors from the very beginning novice level all the way up to the fully educated native speaker at the distinguished level at the very, very top. I try to give something that's a bit more thumbnail, not nailing anyone down to, so there's some wiggle room for my faculty and instructors to make their own informed decisions, but also do give the students some sense of where they need maybe to do, to step up their performance. Normally I would have in this kind of rubric before each of the items that you can see here, a point value as well. For the purposes of this presentation, I've put them in the order simply of what I would give the lion's share of points to, moving down for things that I would count for fewer points. But for that particular exercise, I want to look at discourse. Was the presentation that they would be recording? So in this case, they're coming up with a menu, and then they I asked them to do a short audio, video, whatever their choice is, recording of them, reporting back what items did they choose, how much each item was, did they stay within their budget, and so forth. Again, they're trying to do a little mini OPI here. So was the presentation cohesive, clear, and intelligible? Did they fulfill the assignment? Did they do what I asked them to do? Use of lexicon, vocabulary. Was the vocabulary that was used appropriate and varied, or did they stick to really simple early semester, first semester words? Their grammar, I do want to look at that. Was grammar use appropriate? Were there any patterned errors, things that by now in the, say, end of the second semester should now no longer be occurring for a student at that level? Did their grammar use, the mistakes that they made, impede comprehension by a native speaker? And then I also do want to pay some attention to pronunciation and intonation, because in Russian, indeed in most of our languages, short of things like the classics and ASL, intonation and pronunciation carry meaning with them. And so were there any consistent irregularities in pronunciation? Did pronunciation distract from the presentation or the interaction? So that's the rubric that I would use to set up for that particular bit. What I've tried to give you here is a portrait of a virtual assessment, a virtual SOPI, if you will, from 3 different sources of input: face-to-face interaction, breakout rooms, and homework tasks, that all taken all together holistically provide us with that rateable sample, even if it may be a very brief one. Some may question the rateability of a sample that may only be a minute or 2 minutes long, but nonetheless in this virtual world, we need to kind of take our assessment where we can get it. So if you're getting this kind of consistent sampling from in class, the breakout rooms, and homework, when you add that all together, that's where I'm coming up with my simulated SOPI experience. And so from that, I tried to hit, and I did it right on the dot. So we now do have 11 minutes left in your time here for Q&A. And I would ask Betsy if she wouldn't mind jumping in here to go back and maybe pull out some questions. I know there were a few questions that were given to Pat that she answered later in the presentation, but if there are any unanswered questions that Pat could answer, or any questions for me.
Well, I also would say people can unmute and ask, because they may have gotten, I mean, I don't want to repeat someone's question if they got it from someone else.
Right.
So unmute and ask if you want. There were some discussions about websites to find authentic materials.
Yeah.
What do you use for that?
So I think that is a terrific question that to me always is one of those big hurdles to get over, that once instructors get over the, where do I find this stuff? It suddenly becomes, why haven't I been teaching with it all along? What I give my TAs, I start with them very early as grad students to say, wherever you would go to find something in your own native culture, simply transfer that into the target culture. So I need food items. He said, well, if you were looking for food items in the States, where would you go? I said, well, I'd go to a grocery store site. Perfect. So now go into Russian, Google in Russian or French or German or Hebrew or Arabic, Italian, whatever. Google in supermarket in Paris, supermarket in Tel Aviv, supermarket in Meknes, and see what comes up. Go to those sites, click on images, and you suddenly will find this plethora of stuff out there. It is such a wonderful modality actually to do the kind of search that generationally we've been able to switch from by virtue of the internet, from having to search on, go through magazines and all to find images of the things we want. It's so much simpler now. And now that we're virtual online anyway, it's simple continuity of getting the material and putting them into your lessons.
There were some questions for Pat. Let's see. Were the student videos available only to the two students and the instructor? And what platforms did you use for the videos? I think you had mentioned some of that.
Okay, what we did was we had each instructor, the French instructors and the American instructors, put their students' videos in a box folder, and we shared all the videos. So all the students involved in the project had access to all of the videos. Not to say they watched them all. They generally watched the video that their partner or partners had created. Right. But they were free to watch any that they wanted. In terms of platform for video recording, for recording the conversations, we tried out a couple of different things. We started with Skype, but we found that recording Skype conversations was a little clunky. So we tried different things, and we ended up deciding that Zoom was our best option, partly because at the time we could get Zoom accounts for free, and that allowed for 40 minutes of teleconferencing, which was fine. That's basically what we were shooting for, and students were able to do that quite easily, I would say.
So there was a two-part question. Did you pair them randomly, or did you use some criteria? And did you keep those pairings the whole time?
We paired them randomly for the most part, unless we were aware of any particular situation where, that were, sort of unique. But in terms of, they kept the same, so you saw that there were two English professors. So we worked with the class of one English professor for the Christiane for the first half of the semester, and we worked with the students in Coralie's class in the second half of the semester. So the students had the same partners for the first two conversations, but then they switched and they had different partners, the same two partners, but different from the first ones for the last two conversations, if that makes sense. If not, I'll try to re-explain.
How many total students were involved?
In our class, there were 18, and in each of the French classes, together there were 18 as well, but 9 and 9, which is why we had 2 American students working with 1 French student in each part of the semester. And I have to say that in a way, it worked out really well that we were working with 2 different classes over the course of the semester, because the French calendar for educational calendar is very different from the American calendar. So we were able to actually schedule things more easily as a result of that.
Somebody had a question about Talk Abroad that Pat mentioned, and the cost. That it's not a free service, right? And you mentioned that you have had them participate multiple times. I know that in Spanish, they only require a minimum of 2 sessions per semester, so that, and they would pay an extra $30, which students really do not like. And so how do you handle this with multiple sessions of Talk Abroad?
Well, from what I understand, I haven't done it myself, but in Italian, they've been doing it for a couple of years now. And they have 4 conversations over the course of the semester, but they're only 15 minutes each. So if they get 4 conversations for $30, and the Italian students haven't been complaining is what I understood. But it sounds like in Spanish, they're doing 2 conversations for 30 minutes each. Is that right?
I'm not sure about the time, but I know that there is a charge, and the students find that excessive because they also pay for the textbook, and then course fees, etc. And I see some teachers here mention this as well.
Yes.
Mhm.
That is a concern. And for me, I'm thinking about using it in our online French courses, but there's no materials cost for those courses at all, no textbooks or anything. So if we were to do it, that would be the students' only cost. Yeah.
Pat, I wanted to know, did you do, in between the videos, did you, how did you help students to understand the videos from the French students? Did you pick up certain videos and did listening activities for the whole class? So what happened when students were not able to understand the videos from their pen pals?
Okay, so two things. Especially at the beginning, we captioned, we wrote transcripts. We didn't caption the videos, but we wrote transcripts of the videos in French for the students to help them understand what was being said. That was Max and myself who did that. And then as they went along, we found that we didn't have to do that quite so much. And then when the students had questions about, trying to understand what the native speakers were saying, usually they would bring that to Max and he would help them with it.
Thanks.
Sure.
Somebody also mentioned about how are people handling the situation with masks? How do you teach a language course when you have to wear a mask?
Yeah, UT had a meeting with all of the language faculty and our dean, and indeed that argument was one of the pivotal arguments that convinced her to allow us to put in a kind of blanket online request for language classes, is that indeed if we were to go to face-to-face, the mere constraint of wearing a mask takes away a massive part of what we rely on in our language classes. Even in this virtual reality, as you're watching me speak now, we get a lot of the communication from one another by reading faces, by reading my open, not a covered face, but a visible face. Getting all of that, not to mention, you saw in my rubric there, I still put it pronunciation and intonation on how do you teach pronunciation, intonation when you're masked. So I think it's a very, very important consideration if you have any leverage or leeway in being able to tell your administrators, please, I'd rather teach online virtually than to meet face-to-face with masks on.
Thank you.
Someone also asked Pat if you'd be able to share the link to the website, which wasn't shown on the screen.
Oh, right.
Sure. I'll be happy to do that.
And I just want to mention while we have a chance, if you want CPE credit, please register before you leave. And the link is here again. And we'll post the slides and the video recording soon. Alex and I will get to it probably next week.
Anything else? Any parting shots? Any last comments, questions? Anything put up on chat? Anything else that I'm seeing up there? Oh, I saw something on break. If you use breakout rooms, can you go back to see the other conversations that you missed? Yes, students in the breakout rooms. So it's an important functionality issue on Zoom. I can't record breakout rooms so that I can see them and everyone else can see them, but the individuals in the breakout rooms can record their sessions. And so if there are things that they miss, I ask, and I've had no trouble with this, I've asked students to put their breakout rooms up on our learning management system Canvas so that I can review them. I don't post them, I don't show them with any other students or anything like that. So there's still just the 3 or 4 students who are in the breakout room that have access to them, but it allows me to put better feedback on them. Anything else? Betsy, there was a question asking about, do we get the slides by email, or what's the modality of getting everything after the webinar?
We will put it in our resources and we'll send an email out to all of y'all who registered.
So that's resources on the TLC page. Just go to the page on the left-hand column. There's the label resources. Click on that and you'll see all of our material there.
we'll see this and many more
Tons more.
that you're welcome to watch. Any more questions? Yeah. Oh, we have a survey before you go. Please give us your opinions about things. Where am I? Need to grab that survey and post it. Maybe Alex can do it faster even than I can.
Well, while Betsy's looking for that, I just quickly wanted to add on behalf of the TLC and the faculty of the College of Liberal Arts to thank you all so much for participating today. I know how many things you're juggling on your, how many things you have on your plate right now and are juggling in terms of keeping your own lives and schedules going. So thank you all for your time and your questions and insight into the material today. And please come to other TLC and Lates and choral events throughout the remainder of the summer and the fall. Betsy, did you get the?
I did. I posted it. It may be scrolling by.
There it is. Yes.
Yeah.
There is a survey link now in the chat section. Please do fill it out. That filling out these surveys helps me go into the dean's office and say, please make sure you keep the TLC running for us. Please keep giving us an office space and Betsy's wonderful person. Yeah.
Can I plug something?
Please plug away.
Plug away.
Okay. This coming Wednesday at high noon, the Liberal Arts Instructional Technology Services team is going to be presenting the results of the survey for language departments that we sent out a couple weeks ago. And also encouraging people who want to talk about their experience in the spring, what they've been doing in the summer, and how they're preparing for the fall. We're all going to be getting together to do that. And I'll be sending a URL on Monday so you'll know how to gain access.
Brilliant.
Thank you.
Excellent.
Tom, do you want to talk about the August 8th presentation also?
Yes, let me read, because I did that at the very beginning, but some of you I know haven't come in yet. Please, our next webinar, very similar in format, actually identical in format, Saturday from 2 to 4 p.m. on August 8th, a group of 3 of us who were working in the issues of race, equality, and diversity throughout society, but looking specifically at what we may be doing intentionally or unintentionally in our language classes explicitly or implicitly, that may be hindering the kind of inclusivity that we all want our languages to have, especially given that we're all so global, and especially online. It's so easy while we're trying to attend to, am I sharing my screen? Have I got myself muted? Have I done this and that? To forget things like, what about my hearing impaired students? What about my sight impaired student? What about my African-American students? What about my students who are limited English proficiency, who can't follow what I'm saying about the grammar of Sanskrit? So whatever special needs are, we're going to be talking about that. And I really am looking forward to that discussion, because we want it to be a difficult discussion. We want participants to come with their difficult questions about the issue of inclusivity and intersectionality in our language classes. Thanks for reminding me, Betsy. Anything else there? Oh, there it is. Yeah. I think that looks like it there. People just, the link is there. And just reminding everyone, we will post the slides and the materials from this talk as soon as we get them to Betsy. She and Alex will put them up there. So great, thank you all again. Let me thank my co-presenters once again. Thank you so much.
Thank you all.
Everyone stay safe, stay healthy, and we look forward to seeing you at the next TLC Lates choral event. Thanks so much. Bye all.
Thank you. Have a good Sunday.
Yes, have a good rest of your weekend.
Thank you very much. An honor and a pleasure to be with you.
Always, thank you. It's our pleasure. Our pleasure.
Большое спасибо.
Enchanté. Au revoir.
Well, au revoir. До свидания. Adieu.
Adiós.
Adiós. Sí, ¿cómo? Vaya con Dios. A las todos. Bye all.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, Betsy and Alex. Thank you. Thank you, Dale. Thank you, Dale and Pat. Mwah, mwah. Abrazos, un gran abrazo. Yes, elbows. Get some rest. We'll send you our stuff. Thanks, Betsy.
Yes, please. Y'all send me the slides.
Yeah.
Okay.
Take care.
Right.
Thank
Okay, bye.
Ciao.
Talk to you Monday, Alex.
Yep, have a good
Thanks,
weekend.
Alex. Thanks,
Bye.
Alex. Don't cut your hair. Don't cut your hair.
Yeah, one day.
Bye-bye.
Wow.